Let's start with the formula. Views equals clout equals fame/ego, depending on the context. Now, the ego and fame part is pretty self-explanatory, as most people are egomaniacal in some way, and understand the appeal of fame, even if they don't want that fame for themselves necessarily. But clout is the interesting part here. What is it? Where did it come from? And why is everybody on TikTok thirsting after it like it's the stepbro in a bad porn? Now, obviously, the committing of crimes and posting it online is ultimately for attention and validation. And this attention and validation is often referred to as clout. And this desire for clout has been around for basically as long as humans have wanted attention, which is forever. But before the Kia challenge and the devious licks challenge, and before we normalized assaulting people in public, there were the Vikings. And I swear this is relevant. The Vikings existed between the 8th century and the 11th century, and were best known for things like raiding and pillaging. But they also had games that were very similar to the Olympics, in which they would have sports like wrestling, archery, stone throwing, swordplay, and strongman competitions. With the idea of these being, the winner got to brag about the fact that he was the winner. And in fact, bragging was actually a Viking sport. During these bragging competitions, they would divide up into teams, and then each team would drink, boast, tell rhymes, and then make insults about the other team. Then the second team would try and outdrink and outbrag and outboast and out-insult the first team. And the winner would be the first team that could continue to drink and brag and remain articulate and witty without passing out. And frankly, I think we should bring that sport back. That sounds like a good time. Now, other famous clout-chasing sports included things like the Olympics, obviously, but also medieval jousting competitions. You've probably seen these on TV shows before, but they were basically created around the ability to joust, ride on horseback, shoot bows and arrows, and fight with your sword. But it's not just sporting and team things that have been clout generous throughout history. A lot of individuals and famous leaders were very well known for doing wildly extravagant things in order to boost their own egos and get a lot of attention from their subjects or from their enemies. They basically did this to assure their population that they were good, wholesome leaders of the people, and the only people that would be massacred were their enemies. Julius Caesar, for example, invaded the Britons in 55 BC, and while the reason he gave the Romans originally was that he said that the Britons had aided the Gauls in the Gallic Wars, historians speculate that probably the reason he actually did it was to bolster himself in the public eye. At the time, he was very popular, but he didn't have the same amount of popularity as two other very important Roman leaders of the time, Pompey and Crassus. So his solution to try and gain a little more popularity was to conquer an entire people. And clout is an absolutely wild reason to go on a massive military conquest, but surely Senpai will notice him now. Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire was widely considered as one of the richest people of human history, and he personally controlled about half of the entire global supply of salt and gold in the 14th century. He's primarily famous because he, one, contributed a tremendous amount to architecture and education of his time in his kingdom, but also he's known for the most extravagant pilgrimage of all time. During this year-long pilgrimage, he took 60,000 people 4,000 miles across Africa, and he spent so much money that he literally destabilized economies and caused mass inflation due to the influx of gold in the local economic system. Basically, he wanted to be famous and remembered and go down in history. And then he realized that because he controlled almost exactly half of the entire world's monetary supply, that he could just kind of walk around and become famous. All this is to say, clout is a hell of a drug, and the internet did not help this, because now not only could you find a bunch of other people that were also gaining clout, but the barrier to entry to gain clout became very low very quickly. You no longer had to do arbitrary things like conquer countries or destabilize global economies. All you needed really was a smartphone, and aside from that, it was essentially free. Every little boy or girl, whenever they do something funny, they want to tell their friends about it, because that little bit of attention and validation and humor, it builds camaraderie. And there's also a chance they will become the funny person of that group, aka a local kind of clout. And then the internet came along and said, hey, why would you share this funny thing with just your friends when you could share it with that anonymous 40-year-old person on the other side of the world who goes by the name of Millie and spends just a little too much time watching middle school pranks, but he assures you he's your friend. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, internet video was born, and now you had the ability to go viral from basically anywhere in the world. all you had to do was post something on the internet. However, the downside to being able to go viral by committing crimes was two main issues. The first was moderation, and the second was accessibility. Accessibility was difficult because algorithms like we have with TikTok and YouTube today didn't exist at the time. So if you wanted to see a crime being committed, you have to specifically search for that crime being committed, or you had to be sent that video by someone else. So if I were to do an internet challenge where I, hypothetically stole a car and took it for a joyride, the chances of that getting seen widely in the early internet was much, much lower than it is now, because probably there weren't a ton of people who were looking up pranks or criminal videos where you hotwire and steal a car. There just probably wasn't much search volume for that. You essentially had to rely on people either specifically looking for it or stumbling across it and sending it to their friends. And the second reason, moderation, is because a lot of social media companies started to realize that advertisers didn't want to run their ads on websites that featured a lot of unfamily-friendly content. So a lot of websites that were blowing up where video content was shared, such as Facebook and MySpace, started adding terms of service where you basically agreed that you weren't going to share anything that was illegal, such as stealing a car and taking it for a joyride. This kind of moderation severely nerfed the ability for you, the user, to commit a crime, film it, and then go viral for it. And as such, a lot of these would-be criminals who are more than happy to commit crimes in order to get a lot of internet updoots and points instead switched over to doing pranks. And as with most things that start to become trendy on the internet, there is a bit of an iceberg for pranks. Here at the top, you've got pranks that may or may not actually be funny, but absolute worst case scenario with these pranks is that people are slightly inconvenienced. Up here would be things like rickrolling or like toilet papering someone's car or something small like that. And this next layer, you have pranks that are annoying, but they aren't directly hurting anyone. And here you have pranks like yelling in public, sending annoying viruses to other people's computers, and then like farting on elevators. And then here at the darkest layer, you have pranks that harm or kill people. And these include things like swatting or bomb threats or the Kia challenge or the devious licks challenge. And these are the ones that had more trouble thriving online in kind of a more mainstream scenario because of the aforementioned inaccessibility and content moderation. But by doing these pranks, you started to get views on the internet. And if you did these pranks consistently enough and often enough, and you had big enough reactions to the pranks, then you started to build a community, and maybe not a great or wholesome community, but a community nonetheless. And building this community and having the social validation, also known as clout, of a bunch of people constantly telling you how funny you were, became really easy with the following and subscribing system that a lot of video sharing websites have. Now, it's important to note that illegal pranks, for the sake of clout, have always existed. But the trouble of them breaking into the mainstream is because they were often relegated to the darkest corners of the web. And that was because a lot of the mainstream platforms at the time didn't want this kind of stuff to spread on their platform. The internet was a potential gold mine for a lot of tech companies, thanks to the deep, deep pockets of advertisers, since they were not going to do anything to risk those advertisers bailing. Because if the advertisers bailed, then the CEOs and the investors in those companies risked losing everything and becoming poor. Ew. In addition to that, there was a bit of a selection bias, as your prank might be showed against a bunch of other videos that the potential viewer might also want to watch. Someone might choose not to watch your video of an illegal or borderline illegal prank happening because they don't want to be viewed by other people, nor do they want to view themselves as the kind of person that would watch and therefore encourage this type of content. So the barrier to entry of people having to choose to click on something that might be morally objectionable made it additionally hard for these kinds of things to blow up and become as mainstream as, say, gaming content or more innocent pranks of the time. But this little conundrum was solved when the renaissance of the vertical video came along, and suddenly you didn't have to click on the pranks. And thumbnails and titles that might get you banned from YouTube didn't matter either, because you don't really have those on vertical short form videos. And you don't need to worry about people wanting to watch something else instead because there was only one video shown at a time on your screen. And you also didn't need to worry about people's moral perception of themselves claiming that they would never support that kind of content because they didn't have to actively choose to support it anymore. It just popped up on their phone as they were scrolling. There's no active decision there involved for them to feel potentially bad about. And so suddenly, anyone could pretty much see anything and react to it with likes or interact with it with comments. And all the engagements on that video, whether good or bad, would boost that video in the algorithm, and that would cause more people to see it. And it doesn't matter if 99% of the comments are calling out how horrible the video is. These comments boost that video in the algorithm, and so the 1% of people that see this and enjoy this kind of illegal or sick content are more likely to stumble across it thanks to the 99% of other people condemning it. And not only are they more likely to see it, they're also more likely to realize how much attention and following and how big of a community these people that were doing this kind of objectionable content were getting. And then they realized they want that attention and validation and clout. And they have shaky morals to begin with, so why would they not start doing criminal things and posting it on TikTok solely for the purpose of getting that juicy, juicy internet clout? And that is how we reach the... Now, throughout this video, I've mentioned several issues in the rise of crime-related videos, and just to reiterate, they are moderation by big tech that didn't want their platform associated with that kind of content, lack of accessibility due to the aforementioned moderation, a moral high ground where people who, even though they might enjoy that kind of content, don't want to view themselves as the type of person that would support it, and one other issue, which I didn't mention earlier, but that is the barrier to entry of making these kinds of videos. If you want to make a YouTube prank, then you need to have things like cameras, other people to set stuff up and act in the prank, help editing, computers that can support that kind of editing. You need to make a thumbnail and have a script, and then the whole thing needs to be 8 to 12 minutes long, and you have to have a good title and a good description. And the barrier to entry is not super high, but it's certainly more than zero if you want to have a video that does well on YouTube. Basically, if you don't follow YouTube's pretty strict rules for how to make a video succeed on their platform, then you're not going to have a video that succeeds on their platform. However, basically all of these issues are solved when TikTok came along. And also, there were suddenly more views to go around. See, if you were to say spend 1 hour binge watching YouTube, you might get 4 to 12 videos in. But a 1 hour TikTok binge? And you could watch hundreds of videos. The number of available views to any potential video absolutely skyrocketed, which meant the chance that your video would be viewed by a lot of people also skyrocketed. And couple that with the fact that you don't really need a title or a thumbnail or a bunch of research on descriptions or popular trends often. You basically just upload it and you watch the views roll in. The only thing you really need is something of shock value. And lo and behold, the pranks that were dying out on YouTube, well, they can be pretty shocking. And instead of having 8 to 12 minutes of these constantly shocking things that people might get bored of and click off, you could have just 1 or 2 shocking things happen in a very tight 15-second video. And pranks officially became TikTokified. But because this kind of content would not satiate people for very long, as at some point it felt like, oh, they had seen all the pranks on TikTok, there was pressure to create even more extreme pranks with more extreme reactions, and it slowly devolved into going from more or less innocent pranks to more extreme pranks to cry. At some point, the innocent pranks no longer had the shock value that it took to consistently bring viewers back. And that is how you get this rise of crime on TikTok, or as I like to call it, the TikTokification of crime. And yes, I stole that title from Gabby Bell. And the idea of these crimes is you avoid a lot of the moral issues that people might have with it, or the viewers potentially might have with watching it, by making it not directly harm a person. Therefore, it's kind of okay in your mind. Basically, you try and center these pranks around the destruction of property. And that's why you get things like the Devious Licks challenge going viral, because there's not a perception that people are being harmed. It's just you taking stuff from a school. How bad can that be? Because no actual person is getting harmed, it feels like innocent fun. And also, as the views come rolling in, you get that crazy hit of dopamine, and that feels so good. We've banned children from taking most anything that would cause any form of addiction, because they're young and developing, and we don't want them to create a reliance on some substance. But the views and the comments and the interactions of you doing something wild on the internet and getting just tons of clout for it is its own form of drug that kids are getting addicted to. Every time I post a YouTube video, I get a little number in the YouTube studio that tells me how well this video is performing out of the last 10 videos that I've posted. And even though I'm a tiny channel, when the video does well, I get really happy. And then when the video does bad, it affects my mood negatively for the rest of the day. And I'm a fully developed adult. I've got a job and a life and friends outside of this little YouTube sphere in which I exist. So if it affects me that badly and I didn't grow up with it, how much worse is it affecting these kids that are growing up dependent on this? When adults tell kids not to do something, the kids basically want nothing more than to do that thing. And they also want to see other kids do that stuff. So when you open up a whole world to them where they can see other people doing the stuff that they're not supposed to, and also be encouraged to do that stuff that they're not supposed to, and then film it and get millions of views off of it, you get a world where they come to depend on this kind of validation, aka this clout. And you inevitably get a cycle where it starts at innocent stuff like silly little pranks. And then it slowly devolves into more harmful stuff and crime as people are chasing after this 15 minutes of fame. The Devious Licks challenge caused tens of thousands of dollars in damage that the public schools probably can't afford. The Benadryl challenge caused 3 teenagers to get hospitalized for overdosing on Benadryl. The Blackout challenge actually killed a kid. And the Kia challenge? That killed 4 teenagers. And I'm sure there's more out there, but frankly, I stopped researching it after those because I just started to feel sick to my stomach that this kind of seeking of validation is actually killing people. So there is your history of the TikTokification of crime. And if you're an adult watching this, make sure the kids around you are okay. And if you're a kid watching this, just remember that internet clout and views are not worth dying for. Thanks for watching.